When one of the most famous men on the planet knelt down on one knee in the middle of a crowded gymnasium so he could be at eye level with a 7-year-old girl. Nobody in the room was expecting what happened next. It was Saturday, October 4th, 2025. The James and Jesse Jones Community Center on Jordan Avenue in New Orleans, Louisiana. 11:47 a.m. The gymnasium smelled like floor wax and the faint residue of 100 school events that had happened in this room across many years. The bleachers were folded back against the walls. The basketball hoops were raised to the ceiling. Folding tables had been set up in 3 rows down the center of the floor, and on those tables were drawings, not just any drawings. The drawings of 31 children between the ages of 5 and 12, all of whom had spent the past 8 weeks in a free after-school art program organized by a non-profit called Colors Forward that operated out of 2 rooms in the back of this community center and had been operating out of those 2 rooms for 6 years, on a budget that required its director to personally fundraise at least 4 times a year just to keep the supply closet stocked with paper. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds, a man who has to turn sideways through door frames and whose hands are wide enough to palm a human head the way most people palm a basketball, had come to the community center as part of a foundation visit. He had been in New Orleans for 2 days. This was the 3rd stop of the morning. He had come to see the art program, to see the space, to talk to the director, to do what he does at these visits, which is be present and listen and let the people in the room be more than the occasion of his appearance. He had walked the tables, he had looked at the drawings, he had stopped at several of them and asked questions. He had been moving slowly and without hurry in the way he moves through rooms where children are present, smaller somehow, more careful, as if the awareness of his own size is calibrated differently when the people around him are small. And then he had stopped. At the end of the 3rd table, in front of a drawing on a piece of white paper approximately 12 inches by 16 inches. He had looked at it for a moment. And then he had knelt down on one knee, not to look at the drawing more closely, because standing in front of it felt wrong, because the drawing required him to be lower than it. He knelt on one knee on the gymnasium floor of the James and Jesse Jones Community Center, and he looked at the drawing for 4 minutes. 4 minutes. He did not speak. He did not move. 31 children and their parents and the Colors Forward staff and the foundation representatives and Kevin Okafor, who had been standing 6 feet behind him, stood in complete silence for 4 minutes while one of the most recognizable men in the world knelt on a gymnasium floor and looked at a drawing made by a 7-year-old girl. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The gymnasium was very quiet. The 4 minutes passed, and when Shaq finally looked up, the girl who had made the drawing was standing 6 feet away with her grandmother's hand in hers, looking at him, and he looked at her, and for one more moment, 4 seconds, neither of them said anything. And then Shaq said the only thing he could find to say. "How old are you?" The girl looked at him with the direct, unimpressed gaze of a 7-year-old who has been prepared by her grandmother for the fact that a large famous man was coming to look at her drawing and has decided to be exactly herself about it. 7, she said. He nodded slowly. He looked at the drawing again. "Did anyone help you?" he said. "No," she said. He nodded again. He looked at her. "What's your name?" "Celestine," she said. "But everyone calls me Cece." He stayed on one knee for another moment. Then he stood. And even standing, looking down at her, something in his face had not recovered from what was on that table. Stay with us through this entire video. Because what Cece drew, what a 7-year-old girl in New Orleans made in 8 weeks with supplies that a non-profit director had to fundraise 4 times a year to keep in stock, is something that will stop you the same way it stopped Shaq. And when the hidden truth about where that drawing came from comes out, when the connection between this little girl and Shaquille O'Neal becomes clear, you will understand why 4 minutes of silence in a gymnasium was exactly the right response. But first, let's go back. Not to the gymnasium, earlier, Saturday morning. October 4th, 2025, 6:30 a.m. The house on Piety Street in the Bywater neighborhood of New Orleans was small and narrow the way New Orleans houses are small and narrow, compressed horizontally but tall, 2 stories, painted the faded coral pink that South Louisiana sun does to painted wood over enough years. A fig tree in the side yard, a porch with 2 plastic chairs and a citronella candle burned down to the glass. Inside, upstairs, in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, Celestine Marie Turod was already awake. Cece Turod, 7 years old. second grade at Langston Hughes Elementary on Abundance Street. Small for her age, dark and thin, with her grandmother's eyes, wide set, very dark, the kind of eyes that seem to be watching something in the middle distance even when they are looking directly at you. She was not nervous about the visit that morning. Her grandmother, Odette Chirode, 67 years old, had told her that a large man was coming to see the drawings and that she should be herself, which was the only instruction Odette ever gave Cece about anything because it was the only instruction Odette believed had any lasting value. Cece was sitting on the floor of her bedroom with her sketchbook, not drawing, just looking at her drawing from the previous day, a habit she had developed in the 8 weeks since the Colors Forward program started. She drew, and then she looked at what she drew, and then she slept, and in the morning she looked at it again before doing anything else, because the drawing always looked different in the morning. Today was the day of the community center visit. She looked at the drawing. She looked at it for a while. She closed the sketchbook. She went downstairs for breakfast. Odette Chirode, 67 years old, retired school bus driver, Orleans Parish Public Schools, 29 years. Bywater neighborhood, her whole life except for 3 years in Baton Rouge after Katrina, when the house on Piety Street had 4 feet of water in it, and the fig tree was gone, and the coral pink paint was the color of something ruined. She had come back. She had replanted the fig tree from a cutting from her neighbor's yard. She had repainted the house herself with 2 cans and a ladder she borrowed from the house 2 doors down. She was raising Cece alone, had been raising her since Cece was 14 months old. When Cece's mother, Odette's daughter, Monique, had gone through something that Odette described to people who asked as a hard time, which was the specific New Orleans way of compressing an enormous amount of pain into a socially portable phrase. Monique was in Baton Rouge now. She was better. She called twice a week. She had not been well enough to be Cece's primary parent, and she had known this and had made the decision, which had cost her everything, and which Odette respected deeply for what it was, which was a decision made from love and clear-eyed self-knowledge. Cece knew her mother. She spoke to her on the phone. She was not confused about the shape of her family. She had been raised by Odette, and Odette had raised her in the specific way of a woman who has been in a city for 67 years and knows that cities ask hard things of people, and that the way to survive the asking is to know who you are and to keep being it. Cece knew who she was. She had known since she was 4, when Odette had given her a set of washable markers and a pad of paper, and discovered that Cece would sit for 45 minutes without moving or making noise, which in Odette's experience of 4-year-olds was not normal. She had known by 5 that the drawing was the thing, not a thing, the thing. And by 6 she had started drawing faces. Not the way children usually draw faces, not the circle with 2 dots and a curved line, actual faces. With the specific attention to the thing that makes a face a particular face, the distance between the eyes, the way the nose sits, the specific weight of an expression. Odette had watched this develop with the specific quiet of a woman who has lived long enough to know that you do not narrate a child's gift back to them. You watch. You make sure the paper and the markers are available. You say, keep going. She had enrolled Cece in Colors Forward in August, when she heard about it through the church. 8 weeks later, Cece had made the drawing that was on the table in the gymnasium. But to understand the drawing, to understand what Shaq was kneeling in front of for 4 minutes, you have to understand something about Cece Chirode. You have to understand that the faces Cece drew were not random. She drew the people she loved, her grandmother, her mother on the phone screen, Miss Adeas, her 2nd grade teacher, who wore earrings that Cece thought about often, the man at the corner store on Dauphine Street who called her Lil One and always had a piece of hard candy. She drew the faces of the people in her world, the specific, actual faces, with the distance between the eyes and the weight of the expression. And 8 weeks ago, when Colors Forward's program director, a woman named Kezia Fontenot, 39 years old, had told the children they could draw anything they wanted for the final exhibition, anyone they wanted, Cece had gone home and thought about it for 3 days. And then she had drawn a face she had never seen in person, a face she knew only from the photograph that had been on Odette's refrigerator for as long as Cece could remember. A man in a basketball uniform, holding a trophy, laughing, a big man. The biggest man Cece had ever seen in a photograph. She had asked Odette about it when she was 4. "Who is that?" she had asked. "That's Shaquille O'Neal," Odette had said. "He's from here." Cece had looked at the photograph. "He's very big," she had said. "He is," Odette had said. "But look at his face. Cece had looked at his face. The man in the photograph was laughing, not the performed laugh of a photograph taken for a purpose. The real kind. The kind that starts somewhere deep and gets out before the person can organize it into something more appropriate. "He looks happy," Cece said. "He does," Odette said. She looked at the photograph for a moment. "He's from this neighborhood, not this street, but close. And he left and became the most famous basketball player in the world. But he never forgot where he came from." Cece had looked at the photograph for a long time. She had not asked any more questions, but she had looked at that photograph, on and off, for 3 years. On the refrigerator, at eye level when you opened the door, the big man with the real laugh and the trophy. And when Kezia Fontenot said, "Draw anyone you want," Cece went home. She stood in front of the refrigerator. She looked at the photograph for a long time. And then she went upstairs, and she drew his face. Not the photograph. She did not copy the photograph. She drew what she understood about the face. The specific, actual face of a man she had been looking at for 3 years from 2 feet away whenever she opened the refrigerator. The way the eyes sat. The specific wideness of the face. The thing that happened in the face when the laugh was real. She drew it the way she drew all faces. With attention. With the distance between the eyes. With the weight of the expression. She drew it in 8 sessions across 4 days. She showed it to Odette when it was done. Odette stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing for a long time. She looked at the refrigerator. She looked at the drawing. She looked at her granddaughter. "Cece," she said. "Yeah?" Cece said. Odette was quiet for a moment. "Keep going," she said. The morning of October 4th, 2025, 11:32 a.m. Shaq has been at the community center for 40 minutes. He has spoken with Kezia Fontenot. He has been through 2 of the 3 tables. He has talked to children and looked at drawings and been exactly what he is at these visits. Present, unhurried, genuinely there. He reaches the 3rd table. He walks its length. He stops at the end. In front of a drawing on white paper, 12 by 16 inches. Charcoal pencil and smudging, which Kezia Fontenot had taught the older children but which Cece had picked up and applied with a precision that had made Kezia stand at the supply table and simply watch for several minutes. The drawing is a face. It is his face. Not the photograph. Not a copy of anything that exists in the world. A drawing of his face, made by a 7-year-old who has been looking at a refrigerator photograph for 3 years and who understands, in the specific way of people for whom faces are a language, what that face is actually doing. The wideness of it, the specific weight of the cheekbones, the eyes which are not large but which are, in the drawing as in the face, carrying something. The mouth, which in the drawing is not laughing but is near it, paused at the edge of it. The face of a man who is 1 moment from the real laugh, and across the bottom of the drawing, in large careful letters, the 7-year-old's handwriting. "He's from here." Shaq looks at the drawing. He looks at it. He kneels down on 1 knee. The gymnasium goes quiet. 4 minutes pass. Nobody speaks. Nobody moves. He looks at the drawing for 4 minutes, and nobody in the room makes a sound because something is happening that the room understands requires silence. A man is looking at his own face, not the public face. Not the face on the jerseys and the bobbleheads and the commercials and the 3 decades of cameras. His face, the actual one. Drawn by a child who has been looking at a refrigerator photograph for 3 years, and who knows, in the way children sometimes know things before they have words for it, what the face is doing underneath the fame. The face of a man who is 1 moment from the real laugh. He's from here. 4 minutes. And then he looks up, and the girl is there. And she looks at him, and he says, "How old are you?" And she says, 7. What happened in the next hour happened quietly. Shaq spent 22 minutes talking to Cece, not performing a visit, talking. He asked her about the drawing, how she made it, how long it took, where she had learned about smudging. She told him. She was not nervous, and she was not performing not being nervous. She was just 7 and talking to a very large man about a drawing. He asked her about school, about Miss Adias and the earrings. He asked her about the fig tree in the yard, which she had told him about in the context of explaining that she liked drawing plants too, specifically the fig tree. He asked about the refrigerator, how long the photograph had been there. Cece thought about it. "Forever," she said. He looked at Odette. Odette looked at him. "My whole life I've had that photograph," Odette said. "My late husband put it up when Shaq won the championship. He said, 'That's ours. That's from here.'" Shaq was quiet for a moment. "When did your husband pass?" he said. 14 years ago, Odette said. Edmund Thoreau. Shaq nodded slowly. He looked at the photograph on the refrigerator. There was not one here, of course, but he knew the one she meant. He had signed many photographs across 30 years, and he would not remember this one specifically. But he understood what it was. It was a man saying to his family, "This is ours. This is from here. This is something to hold on to." And 14 years after the man who put it up was gone, his granddaughter had been opening the refrigerator and looking at the face on it since she was 4 years old, and at 7 she had drawn it. "He's from here." Shaq looked at Cece. "Did you know I was coming today?" he asked. Cece looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Is that why you drew this?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "Miss Kezia said draw anyone. I drew who I wanted to draw." Shaq looked at her. She looked back at him with a direct, unimpressed gaze. "Okay," he said. "But wait. Here is where the story turns. Here is the part nobody knew. 2 days after the gymnasium visit, Kevin Okafor calls Shaq at 8:15 a.m. "I looked into the Turode family," Kevin says. "Standard background check after foundation visits. Shaq is in his hotel room in New Orleans, leaving that afternoon. Tell me," he says. Kevin tells him about Odette, the school bus driver, the 29 years, the Katrina displacement, the return, the fig tree replanted from a cutting, Cece, Monique in Baton Rouge. And then Kevin says something he has prefaced with a brief pause, the pause that means what follows is not expected. "Edmund Thoreau," Kevin says. "Odette's late husband. Yes, he drove a school bus too. Orleans Parish. He retired in 2003, the same year Odette started." "Okay." Before the school buses, in the 1980s, he drove for a private company, charter buses, sports transport. Shaq is quiet. He drove the team bus, Kevin says, for the New Orleans Recreation Leagues, 1987 and 1988, before you left for LSU. Shaq does not speak. "I found a photograph in the Orleans Parish Sports Archive. A youth basketball league team from 1988. The bus driver in the frame." Kevin pauses. "It's Edmund Thoreau. And the boy standing at the front of the group, tallest by 2 feet. Shaq is very still. "That's you," Kevin says quietly. 16 years old. He drove you. The hotel room is completely quiet. The New Orleans morning is outside the window. Warm, specific, doing what New Orleans mornings do." Shaq presses one enormous hand flat on the desk. He sits with this for a long time. Edmund Thoreau had driven the bus that carried a 16-year-old Shaquille O'Neal to youth league basketball games in 1987 and 1988. He had put a photograph of Shaq on his refrigerator when Shaq won the championship. He had said, "That's ours. That's from here," and then he had died. And his wife had kept the photograph on the refrigerator for 14 years, and his granddaughter had been opening that refrigerator since she was 4 years old, and looking at the face in the photograph. And at 7 she had drawn it. And written across the bottom in large, careful letters, "He's from here." Shaq sits in his hotel room in New Orleans. He does not speak for a very long time. The hand on the desk is completely still. What happened next happened through the foundation, quietly, the way it always happens. First, colors forward. Kezia Fontenot received a call from a foundation representative in late October 2025. An anonymous grant. Enough to cover the program's operating costs for 3 years. Supplies, space, instructor fees, the 4 fundraisers per year that Kezia would no longer need to run. Second, Cece's education. A trust was established, named for no one. It would cover Cece's tuition at whatever school she chose, public or private, from 3rd grade through college, including any art-specific programs she qualified for. The letter to Odette came in a plain white envelope with a P.O. box return address. Odette read the letter at the kitchen table. She set it down. She looked at the refrigerator. The photograph was still there. The big man with the real laugh and the trophy. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about Edmund, about what he had said when he put it up. "That's ours. That's from here." She did not know about the bus. She did not know that the man in the photograph had been a 16-year-old boy who had ridden in her husband's bus to youth league games in 1987 and 1988. She would not find this out for several months, when a journalist named Tamara Osei, researching a piece on foundation giving in New Orleans, would discover the bus records and the photograph in the Orleans Parish Archive. She did not know yet. She just looked at the photograph. And she thought about Edmund. and she said something very quietly to him. Something private, something that belonged to them. Then she went upstairs to tell Cece. In November 2025, Tamara Osei publishes her piece in the New Orleans Advocate. She does not name the foundation. She does not name Shaq. She found the records and the photograph and the connection, but she respects the privacy of the giving. The piece is about Colors Forward and what the grant will allow the program to do. But in the piece she includes a photograph, the archive photograph from 1988. The bus driver and the team. The tallest boy at the front. She does not caption the tall boy. She does not need to. New Orleans knows its own. The piece receives 340,000 views in 4 days. The comments do not mention the grant. They mention the photograph. They mention a bus driver who drove a tall kid to games in 1987 and put a photograph on his refrigerator when that tall kid became the most famous basketball player in the world. They mention a granddaughter who drew the face. He's from here. That phrase travels. The way things travel in New Orleans, which is the way water travels, along the channels that have been there the longest, through the places that have been loved the hardest. In December 2025, at the Colors Forward Winter Showcase at the James and Jesse Jones Community Center, Cece Tourode stands in front of her drawing on the wall. The gymnasium is full, parents and teachers and community members. Kezia Fontenot in her best blazer. Miss Adaisi from Langston Hughes in the earrings that Cece thinks about. Odette in the first row. Cece is wearing a navy dress and her hair is in 2 braids with orange ribbons at the ends, which were Odette's choice, which Cece has accepted. She looks at the drawing, at the face of the big man with the real laugh, at the words across the bottom. He's from here. She looks at the room full of people looking at her drawing. She does not feel nervous. She feels exactly like herself, which is the only instruction Odette ever gives about anything. Shaq is not at the showcase. He is in Orlando. He sees a photograph of it through Kevin Okafor, who sends it on a Saturday evening in December. The photograph shows the gymnasium wall with the drawing displayed on it, large and properly matted and framed now, and in front of it Cece in her navy dress and orange ribbons looking at her own work with the expression of a person who has made something true and is letting it be seen. Shaq looks at the photograph on his phone for a long time. He thinks about a bus, about a big kid in 1987 getting onto a school bus to go to a youth league game, and a man in the driver's seat who probably said something, some version of hello, the thing bus drivers say to the kids who get on. He does not remember Edmund Tourode. There is no reason he would. He was 16. Edmund was one of the adults who made things work, who showed up and drove and made it possible for a 16-year-old boy to get from the neighborhood to the game. But Edmund had remembered him, and he had put the photograph on the refrigerator, and he had said, "That's ours." And 37 years later his granddaughter drew the face and wrote across the bottom, "He's from here," because somewhere out there right now, there is a child who is drawing the people they love, not for anyone, not for a visit or a program or an occasion. For the same reason children draw anything, because looking carefully at something and putting it on paper is a way of saying, "I see this, this matters, I am keeping this." There is a child who is drawing from a photograph on a refrigerator, a face that has been there since before they can remember, a face that belongs to the place they come from. A face that someone else in their family decided, long ago, was worth holding on to. And they have been looking at it since they were 4, and now they are 7. And they have drawn it, and they have written across the bottom what they know to be true. He's from here. Shaq's stepfather told him, "Being big means nothing if you don't stand for something." His mother told him, "You are not too much. The world is still catching up to you." A bus driver named Edmund Tourode, who drove a 16-year-old kid to youth league games and never expected anything from it, told his family with a photograph on a refrigerator, "That's ours. That's from here." And 37 years later the kid he drove knelt down on one knee on a gymnasium floor in New Orleans and looked at a drawing for 4 minutes because a 7-year-old had been looking at that refrigerator photograph since she was 4 and had understood something about the face in it that 4 minutes of silence was the only appropriate response to. That is the whole story. A bus. A photograph on a refrigerator, a fig tree replanted from a cutting, a 7-year-old who draws faces, 4 minutes of silence in a gymnasium on a Saturday morning in October, and across the bottom of a drawing in large, careful letters, "He's from here." Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. We have viewers from New Orleans and the Bywater and the Ninth Ward, and every neighborhood that has ever had a photograph on a refrigerator of someone who made it out and never forgot where they came from. We have viewers from Houston and Orlando and Newark and everywhere this story traveled. We read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the faces on your own refrigerator, the people your family kept photographs of because they stood for something, because they were from here, please hit the like button right now. 1 second. It helps this reach someone tonight who needs to hear it. Because right now, somewhere, a child is looking at a face on a refrigerator, a face that has been there since before they could ask about it, and they do not know yet what they are going to do with what they see. But they are looking, and one day they will draw it, and write across the bottom what they know to be true. If you are new here, welcome, subscribe, join a community that believes that the things we put on our refrigerators, the faces, the photographs, the people we decide to keep looking at, are some of the most important decisions we ever make. Share this with one person today, the one who put a photograph on a refrigerator, the one who is still looking at it, the one who has not yet drawn it. Because that is exactly how it travels. One photograph, one refrigerator, 3 years of a child looking at a face, 4 minutes of silence in a gymnasium, and 7 words written by a 7-year-old at the bottom of a drawing that stopped the room. He's from here. Click on the video on your screen right now, because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. There is something specific about what happened in the 4 minutes that Kevin Okafor has thought about many times since October 4th. He has been with Shaq for 11 years. He has been in rooms with him across many different kinds of occasions. He knows what Shaq looks like when he is moved by something, when he is performing being moved, and when the difference between those two things has collapsed entirely and what is happening on his face is simply what is happening. The 4 minutes was the third kind. Kevin had watched from 6 feet back. He had seen Shaq stop at the drawing and look at it and then, slowly, go down on one knee. And he had seen in the 11 years of knowing this man's face across every kind of room, something he had not seen before, not tears. Not the performed emotion of a public moment. Something quieter, the specific expression of a person who has been recognized, not identified, recognized. The difference being that identification is external. Someone sees who you are and names it. Recognition is internal. Someone sees something true about you and shows it back to you. The drawing was not a portrait of Shaquille O'Neal, the famous basketball player. It was a portrait of a face that was one moment from the real laugh. Cece Tourode had looked at a refrigerator photograph for 3 years and had understood, in the way a 7-year-old understands things, which is directly and without the filters that years of public life install, that the face in the photograph was not performing anything, that the laugh was real, that underneath the fame and the size and the trophies and the specific visual fact of being the largest human being most people have ever seen, there was a face that was about to laugh for real, and she had drawn that, not the icon, the face. Shaq had knelt down on one knee and looked at himself being seen. That is what required 4 minutes. That is what the silence was for. Not grief, not sentiment. The specific recalibration of a person encountering an accurate reflection. Kevin Okafor understood this on the drive back to the hotel. He did not say anything about it. He did not need to. The drawing is not in a museum. It is not in a foundation office. It is not in any of the places that important things go when the world decides they are important. It is on the wall of the 2nd bedroom on Piety Street in the Bywater neighborhood of New Orleans, Louisiana, in Cece's room, above her drawing board. Kezia Fontenot had offered to keep it for the Colors Forward permanent collection. Cece had said no. Odette had asked if she was sure. Cece had said yes. She was sure. It is her drawing. She made it. It stays in her room, which is exactly the right decision. The fig tree in the side yard of the house on Piety Street was replanted from a cutting in 2006. It is now approximately 8 feet tall. In October it produces figs, small and sweet and purple, which Odette picks when they are ripe and which Cece eats by the handful standing in the side yard in the specific October New Orleans light that turns everything amber gold. Cece has drawn the fig tree twice, once in her sketchbook and once on a large piece of paper that is currently in the Colors Forward program's permanent collection, because Kezia had asked specifically for the fig tree and Cece had agreed to that one. The fig tree was not in the drawing of Shaq's face, but it is in the same house, in the same side yard, growing from the same cutting that Odette brought back from the neighbor's yard after Katrina. It was replanted crooked, Odette has said, because she was in a hurry. She just wanted to get it in the ground. She pushed it in at a slight angle because the ground was still not right, and she did not have time to be precise about it. It grew straight, the way things do when you get them in the ground even if the angle is wrong. The way things do when you keep them. In January 2026, Cece Turode begins the second semester of second grade at Langston Hughes Elementary on Abundance Street. Miss Adays is still her teacher. The earrings today are long silver ones that catch the classroom light. Cece notices this. She will draw them later. At home, she sits at her drawing board, the proper one that arrived in a box in November. Professional quality, adjustable, with the specific features that art supply companies design for serious young practitioners. And she opens her sketchbook. She draws the earrings, then she draws Miss Aday's face, with the distance between the eyes and the weight of the expression, with the thing that makes the face a particular face and not just a face. She works for 45 minutes without moving or making noise. Odette is downstairs. She does not interrupt. She knows what 45 minutes of quiet from upstairs means. It means Cece is drawing, which means everything is as it should be. And on the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs, the photograph is still there. The big man with the real laugh and the trophy. He's from here. Cece has seen it so many times she could draw it with her eyes closed. She has already drawn it with her eyes open. She may draw it again, or she may not. She has other faces to draw. The world is full of faces. And she is 7 years old. And she is just getting started. Odette puts the kettle on. The fig tree is doing what it does in January. Bare, patient, holding everything it will need for spring inside itself, waiting for the right moment to show it. The Bywater neighborhood is doing what it does, existing, insisting on existing, the way New Orleans neighborhoods do, with the specific stubborn beauty of places that have been through water and fire and loss and have decided to keep being themselves anyway. And upstairs, a 7-year-old is drawing a face, with attention, with the distance between the eyes and the weight of the expression, with the thing that makes a face a particular face, getting it right, the way she always does. To understand Shaq in this story, you have to go back. You have to go back past the 4 NBA championships, past the MVP, past the finals MVPs and the 15 All-Star selections, past the PhD in education from Barry University in 2012. Past the business empire and the foundation work, and the 30 years of being the largest person in every room. You have to go back past the military bases, Germany, Georgia, San Antonio, and the new schools and the 2 small desks, and the daily choice about who to be inside a body that everyone treated as remarkable, when all he wanted was to eat lunch without someone making it an event. You have to go back to Newark, New Jersey. March 6, 1972. A 17-year-old woman named Lucille O'Neal holding a newborn boy who is already, in the first hours of his life, the largest thing in the room. She looks at him for a long time. She says something private, something only they can hear. And then you have to come forward. To New Orleans, Louisiana, 1987. Shaq is 15, turning 16. Sergeant Philip Harrison has been stationed at Fort Polk in Vernon Parish, Louisiana, and the family has landed in the greater New Orleans area for what will turn out to be 2 years. 2 years of a new school, a new city. The same daily choice about who to be inside the fact of being 6 feet 10 inches at 15. New Orleans is not a city that processes unusual easily. It is a city with its own textures, its own languages, its own rules for who belongs and what belonging looks like. A teenager from Newark dropped into this city is starting over again, which Shaq has learned to do the way you learn to do things you have to do repeatedly, not without cost, but with efficiency. He plays basketball because basketball is the place where the size stops being a problem and becomes the whole point. Because on a court nobody is looking at him the way they look at him in the cafeteria or the classroom. On a court everyone is looking at him because they have to, because he is the thing that determines everything that happens. He plays in the recreation leagues, he rides the buses, the charter buses that take the youth league teams from the neighborhoods to the games and back again. He gets on the bus in the morning and he gets off the bus in the afternoon, and he does not think much about the bus or the person driving it. He is 15 and 16 and the game is what he thinks about. He does not know the name of the man who drives the bus. He has no reason to. The man drives. He gets them there and gets them back. He is one of the adults who makes things work. His name is Edmund Turode. He is 42 years old. He notices the tall kid. Everyone notices the tall kid. But Edmund notices something else too. The way the tall kid gets on the bus in the morning. Not loudly, not performing the fact of being remarkable. Just gets on, finds a seat, looks out the window. A kid who has learned to be ordinary in the moments between the court. Edmund has driven buses for 11 years. He knows what different kinds of kids look like on a bus. This one looks like someone who has made a decision about himself that most people twice his age haven't made yet. He doesn't say anything about this to the tall kid. Bus drivers rarely do. They drive. They make sure everyone gets there and gets back. That is the whole job, and Edmund does it well. 2000. Shaq wins the NBA championship with the Los Angeles Lakers. He is the finals MVP. He is the most dominant player in the world. He is everywhere. The face on billboards and magazine covers and the ESPN scroll and the talk radio arguments about the greatest of all time. In a kitchen on Piety Street in the Bywater neighborhood of New Orleans, Edmund Turod is watching the trophy presentation. He says to his wife Odette, "That's ours. That's from here." He goes to the refrigerator. He puts the photograph on it. He does not tell Odette the full story. He does not say, "I drove that kid in 1987 and 1988. He does not make it about himself. He just puts the photograph up. Because it is true. The kid is from here. That is enough. Edmund Turod passed in 2011. Heart failure. He was 66 years old. He had been driving buses for Orleans Parish Public Schools for 8 years by then, Odette having joined the same service 6 years earlier. After he was gone, Odette had considered many times whether to take the photograph down. Not because she did not want it there. Because refrigerators are for the living, and after a certain point the things on them need to be renegotiated. But she had left it. Because Edmund had put it there and it was still true. And then Cece arrived, 14 months old and looking around at everything with those wide-set dark eyes. And Odette had stopped considering it entirely. The photograph would stay, because the photograph had always been there. And Cece would grow up looking at it, and one day she would draw it, which she did, on a piece of white paper 12 inches by 16 inches with charcoal pencil and smudging, in 8 sessions across 4 days, when she was 7 years old. And she wrote across the bottom, "He's from here." Shaq did not know any of this on October 4th, when he knelt on the gymnasium floor. He knew only the drawing, the face as Kesey had drawn it, the 7 words at the bottom. He did not know about the bus. He did not know about Edmund. He did not know about 1987, and the new school and the recreation leagues and a man who noticed a kid who had made a decision about himself and did not make a big deal about it because bus drivers rarely do. He found out 2 days later, in a hotel room in New Orleans on a Sunday morning with a phone against his ear and Kevin Okafor's voice telling him about a school bus archive and a photograph and a man named Edmund Turod. And he sat with his hand flat on the desk for a long time, not in grief, in the specific stillness of someone encountering the full circle of something they did not know was a circle. A man drives a bus, a kid gets on, the kid becomes the most famous basketball player in the world. The man puts a photograph on his refrigerator and says, "That's ours." The man dies. His granddaughter looks at the photograph for 3 years. She draws the face. She writes, "He's from here." And the man who was the kid on the bus kneels down in a gymnasium and looks at the drawing for 4 minutes, because he is seeing the whole circle, even though he did not know it was a circle until 2 days later. But the body knows before the mind does. The body recognized it and went down on one knee. That is what the 4 minutes was, the body's response to the full circle, before the mind had the information to understand what the body already knew. Sergeant Harrison had told him, "Being big means nothing if you don't stand for something." Lucille had told him, "You are not too much. The world is still catching up to you." Edmund Turod had told his family by putting a photograph on a refrigerator, "That's ours. That's from here." And Cece Turod had told the room by drawing a face on a piece of white paper and writing across the bottom, "He's from here." 7 words, from a 7-year-old. In a gymnasium on Jordan Avenue in New Orleans, on a Saturday morning in October, in front of a man who knelt down on one knee and was quiet for 4 minutes, because sometimes the right response to something true is silence and presence, and 4 minutes of both. That is everything. That is the whole story from the bus in 1987 to the gymnasium in 2025. From a man who noticed a kid and put a photograph on a refrigerator, to a granddaughter who drew the face and wrote 7 words, "He's from here, he always was," and someone remembered. And someone drew it, and someone knelt down and looked, and the circle was complete. Kezia Fontenot, 39 years old, has been running Colors Forward for 6 years. 6 years of 4 fundraisers per year. 6 years of stretching what she has. 6 years of the specific math of a nonprofit that serves a community with significant need and operates on a budget that requires her to be creative in ways that do not show in the program itself, only in the hours she spends on the phone and in grant applications, and at the kind of dinners where people write checks if you say the right things in the right order. She had almost not started the fall session. In August 2025, the budget gap had been $8,400, and she had been at the point she gets to every other year or so where the gap is large enough that continuing requires either a significant donor or a decision about whether to scale back in ways that would hurt the program. She had sent 17 emails in 2 weeks. 11 had been responded to. 5 had resulted in donations. The total from the 5 was $6,100. She had covered the remaining $2,300 from her personal savings account and had not told anyone this because it was not the kind of thing you told people if you were running an organization and wanted people to believe the organization was sustainable. The fall session had started in September. Cece Turode had enrolled on September 8th with a note from Odette that said, "She draws faces. Please give her as many kinds of pencils and charcoal as you have." Kezia had read this note and had put Cece in the Advanced Materials group, which was a group of 5 children who had demonstrated specific technical interest beyond what the standard program covered. 8 weeks later, Cece had produced the drawing on the gymnasium table, and a very large man had knelt down on one knee and not spoken for 4 minutes. And 2 weeks after that, Kezia had received a call from a foundation representative that had resulted in 3 years of operating costs being covered. She had sat in her car in the parking lot of the Dollar General on Elysian Fields Avenue for 23 minutes after the call. She had not cried. She had sat very still and looked at the steering wheel and thought about what 3 years means when you have been doing 4 fundraisers per year for 6 years. It means you can think about the program instead of the fundraising. It means the gap goes away. It means the children in the fall session of 2026 and 2027 and 2028 will have the materials they need without Kezia covering the difference from her personal savings account. It means something has been seen. She had started the car. She had driven home. She had opened her laptop. She had started planning the Spring 2026 session. The Spring 2026 session of Colors Forward has 37 enrolled students, the largest enrollment in the program's history. Word had spread through the community after the Tamara Osei piece in The Advocate, not because of the grant. The grant had not been mentioned by name, but because of the photograph. The archive photograph of the bus driver and the team and the tall boy at the front. New Orleans had recognized its own. Parents who had heard about Colors Forward and not enrolled their children had enrolled them. The second room in the back of the community center, which had been used for storage, was being cleared to become a second classroom for the expanded program. Kezia Fontenot was teaching. She was planning. She was not spending 23 minutes in parking lots in front of Dollar Generals. She was doing the work, which is what she had always wanted to do, which is all she had ever wanted to do. Cece Turode is in the Spring 2026 session. She has moved into the intermediate level, which is the level above where she was in the fall. She does not find this strange. She had been drawing since she was 4. She has been drawing faces since she was 5. She has been using charcoal since she was 7. She is now 7.5, and she is working on something new. She is working on hands, not from a photograph, from life, from Odette's hands specifically, which Cece has been observing during meals and during television watching, and during the specific activity of Odette doing crossword puzzles at the kitchen table, which involves a pencil and a focused expression, and the specific way Odette's hands hold a pencil that Cece finds interesting to look at. She has done 4 preliminary sketches. They are not yet right. She does not find this discouraging. When a drawing is not yet right, it means she has not yet looked enough. The answer is always more looking. She looks more. She will get it right. She always does. And in Orlando, Florida, on a Saturday morning in March 2026, Shaquille O'Neal is at his kitchen table. He is not thinking about New Orleans. He is thinking about whatever is in front of him that morning. Documents, calls, the day. But on the wall of his kitchen, pinned to the small bulletin board beside the window where he has kept things that matter across the years, there is a photograph. Kevin Okafor had found it in the Orleans Parish Archive, and printed it and given it to him on the last day of the New Orleans visit, October 6th, the day before he flew back. A black and white photograph from 1988, a youth basketball league team. 31 members, coaches, and support staff. In the center of the group, the tallest by 2 feet, a 16-year-old boy who is already the largest person in the photograph by a margin that makes the image look like 2 different photographs composited together. In the front left of the group, looking at the camera with the specific expression of someone who has been doing this long enough that being photographed is simply part of the job, a man in a bus driver's uniform. His name is written in the archive metadata, Edmund Chirode, driver. Shaq looks at this photograph sometimes, not often, not obsessively, the way you look at things that have been placed near you because they tell you something you needed to know. He looks at the man in the bus driver's uniform. He tries to remember. He cannot. He was 16. The man drove the bus. There are adults who shape you by their presence and their words and their specific decision to invest in you, and there are adults who shape you by simply showing up and doing the work that makes it possible for you to be somewhere. Edmund Chirode was the second kind. He was there. He drove. He made it possible. Shaq does not remember him, but he looks at the photograph, and he thinks about a refrigerator, and a little girl looking at a face since she was 4, and a drawing on a gymnasium table, and 7 words at the bottom. He's from here. Yes, Shaq thinks. He is. He always was. And someone drove him there, and someone kept the photograph, and someone drew the face, and the circle is complete. The Florida morning continues outside the kitchen window. The bulletin board holds what it holds. And in New Orleans, the fig tree on Piety Street is beginning to show its first buds of the spring, bare through January and February, and now, in March, beginning again, the way it always does, every year, from the same cutting, from the same yard, getting there. Growing straight. That is the whole story. One bus, one kid, one man who noticed and put a photograph on a refrigerator and said, "That's ours." One granddaughter who drew the face. One gymnasium, 4 minutes of silence. One circle completed across 37 years. And 7 words written by a 7-year-old in large, careful letters at the bottom of a drawing that stopped a room. He's from here. He always was. And they never forgot. There is a specific detail about the drawing that nobody except Kezia Fontenot and Cece know. And Kezia only knows because she watched. In the final session before the exhibition, the 7th of 8 sessions Kezia spent on the drawing, Kezia was working on the mouth. The mouth was the last element. She had done the eyes first, because eyes were where she always started. They were the thing that made a face that face, she had decided. The distance and the weight, and then the rest of the face, and now the mouth was last. She worked on it for 40 minutes, then she stopped. She looked at the drawing. She looked at Kezia, who was at the table beside her helping another student with proportion. "Miss Kezia," she said. Kezia came over. She looked at the drawing. "The mouth," Sisti said. Kezia looked at the mouth. It was technically correct. The proportions were right. The placement was right. Everything was right. "What about it?" Kezia said. Sisti looked at the drawing. "It's not laughing yet," she said. Kezia looked at the mouth, at the face, at what the face was doing. She understood. The face was right. But it was not doing the thing that Cece had seen in the photograph for 3 years. It was not the face at the moment before the real laugh. "What do you need?" Kezia said. Cece looked at the drawing for a long moment. "I need to look at it again," she said. She meant the photograph. She went home that afternoon and stood in front of the refrigerator and looked at the photograph for 15 minutes. She was 7 years old, and she stood in front of the refrigerator for 15 minutes looking at a face. Odette, in the living room, heard nothing. No movement, no questions. Just Cece standing in the kitchen. After 15 minutes, Cece came into the living room. "Okay," she said. She went upstairs. The next day, the 8th session, she fixed the mouth. She did not change much. A few strokes, a slight adjustment to the line at the right corner. She stepped back. She looked at the drawing. The face was one moment from the real laugh. She was done. Kezia Fontenot watched this from across the room. She has been teaching art for 14 years. She has watched hundreds of students reach the moment when a drawing becomes what it was supposed to be. This was the most specific instance of that moment she had ever seen. Not the most technically impressive, the most specific. A 7-year-old had looked at a face for 3 years, drawn it across 4 days in 8 sessions, gone home and looked at it again for 15 minutes, come back and fixed the one thing that made it true. A few strokes, the right corner of the mouth. And the face was one moment from the real laugh. Kezia had looked at the drawing for a long moment after Chi-Chi stepped back. She had thought about what to say. She had decided there was nothing to say. She had nodded. Chi-Chi had nodded back. They had moved on to the next student. This is the drawing that Shaq knelt in front of. The drawing with the one thing fixed. The mouth. The moment before the real laugh. It took 15 minutes in front of a refrigerator and a few additional strokes. It took 3 years of looking at a face. It took a 7-year-old who knew the difference between technically right and actually true, and who did not stop until it was actually true. Cece Turode is 7 years old and she already knows the difference, which is the rarest thing in any room, at any age. The specific knowledge of when something is not yet right, and the willingness to go home and look at the refrigerator for 15 minutes and come back and fix it. That is the whole thing, not the talent, not the natural ability, not the fact that she has been drawing since she was 4. The knowing of when it is not yet right, and the doing of the next thing, which in this case was, stand in front of the refrigerator for 15 minutes, and look at the face, until you see what you needed to see, and then go fix the mouth. That is what mastery looks like at 7. That is what it looks like at any age. You do not stop until it is actually true, and then you step back, and you nod, and you move on. Because there is always another drawing, and another face, and another 15 minutes in front of the refrigerator. And that is what makes someone an artist, not the drawing on the table, the 15 minutes before it, and the few strokes after. Shaq knelt on the gymnasium floor and looked at the face for 4 minutes. He was looking at the mouth, even if he did not know that was what he was looking at. He was looking at the thing that was one moment from the real laugh, and it was true. And his body knew it was true before his mind could name it. And it went down on one knee. Because that is what you do when something is actually true. You stop, you look, you give it the 4 minutes it deserves, and the room is quiet, and no one speaks. And the drawing holds the face that is one moment from the real laugh, and it will hold it for as long as the paper holds, which is a long time, which is long enough, which is everything. There is one more thing. It happens in February 2026 and it is small and it belongs here. Monique Tirod, 32 years old, is in Baton Rouge on a Tuesday evening when her mother calls. Monique calls twice a week. Odette calls her back the same days. They have maintained this schedule for 3 years, since Monique moved to Baton Rouge and started the program she was in, and began the slow, specific work of becoming someone who could be a mother to Cece in a full-time way again. She is not there yet. She may get there. She is working toward it with the particular commitment of someone who has decided that the direction matters more than the distance. Odette calls on a Tuesday. She tells Monique about the grant, about Colors Forward, about the drawing, about the visit. She does not tell her about Edmund and the bus. She will tell her eventually, but tonight she tells her about the drawing. Monique listens. She does not say anything for a while when Odette finishes. She drew his face, Monique says. From the refrigerator, Odette says. She's been looking at it since she was 4. Monique is quiet. Mama, she says. I know, Odette says. Another silence. How did he react? Monique says. He knelt down on one knee, Odette says. And he looked at it for 4 minutes, didn't say a word. Monique sits with this. 4 minutes, she says. 4 minutes, Odette says. Another silence. And then what? Monique says. He asked her how old she was, Odette says. She said 7. He asked if anyone helped her. She said no. Monique is very quiet. She said no, she says. She said no, Odette says. Monique looks at the wall of her small apartment in Baton Rouge for a long time. She thinks about her daughter, about wide-set dark eyes, about a child who sits for 45 minutes without moving or making noise, and who knew when the mouth was not yet right, and who stood in front of the refrigerator for 15 minutes until she could see what she needed to see. She thinks about the face on the refrigerator. She thinks about her father. He's from here. Mama, she says. Yes, baby. Tell her I said she got it right. Odette is quiet for a moment. I'll tell her, she says. They talk for a few more minutes. They say goodnight. Odette puts the phone on the kitchen table. She looks at the refrigerator, the big man with the real laugh and the trophy. He's from here. She goes upstairs. Cece is at her drawing board, working on something new. The preliminary sketches of Odette's hands are spread on the desk beside her. Odette stands in the doorway. Your mama called, she says. Cece looks up. She says you got it right. Cece looks at her for a moment. Then she nods, not surprised, not performing modesty. Just the nod of someone receiving information they already knew but are glad to have confirmed. She picks up her pencil. She goes back to work. Odette watches her for a moment, Then she goes back downstairs. She puts the kettle on. The Bywater neighborhood is doing what it does at this hour, settling into the specific warm dark of a February New Orleans evening. The kind of dark that has texture, that has jazz in it somewhere at a distance, that has the fig tree visible through the kitchen window just beginning its first suggestion of spring. Odette makes her tea. She sits at the kitchen table. She looks at the refrigerator. The big man with the real laugh and the trophy. Edmund had put it there. She had kept it. Cece had drawn it. Monique had said she got it right. And somewhere in Orlando, Florida, a photograph is pinned to a bulletin board by a kitchen window. A bus driver in a uniform, and a tall kid at 16 and 31 other people who got somewhere because someone drove them. The circle is complete. The circle was always complete. It just needed a 7-year-old to draw the line that closed it. And she did. He's from here. 7 words, in large, careful letters, at the bottom of a drawing that stopped a room. That is everything. That is the whole story. Every word of it. A bus driver who drove a kid to games in 1987 and put a photograph on a refrigerator and said, "That's ours. That's from here." A grandmother who kept the photograph for 37 years. A granddaughter who drew the face. A man who knelt down and looked for 4 minutes. A mother in Baton Rouge who said, "She got it right." A drawing on the wall in a bedroom on Piety Street in the Bywater neighborhood of New Orleans, Louisiana. Above a drawing board, where a 7-year-old works, every day, getting it right. That is the whole story. We will see you in the next one. The James and Jesse Jones Community Center on Jordan Avenue has a bulletin board in the main corridor beside the gymnasium entrance. It has always had a bulletin board, for as long as anyone who works there can remember. It is a practical thing. Class schedules, event announcements, flyers for programs, the specific administrative clutter of a community space that is used by many people for many purposes. In November 2025, Kezia Fontenot adds one thing to the bulletin board that is not practical. A photograph, printed on regular paper from her laptop. Color, the photograph of Shishi's drawing as it appeared on the exhibition table on October 4th. The face, the charcoal on white paper. The words at the bottom, "He's from here." She pins it to the upper right corner of the bulletin board. She does not announce it. She does not explain it. She puts it there. Within 2 weeks, 5 other people have added things near it. A child's drawing from the spring 2025 session, which a parent has brought in and pinned beside it. A photograph of the first Colors Forward class from 6 years ago. 12 children in the gymnasium, Kezia younger, standing at the back. A handwritten note from a parent that says, "My daughter learned to use charcoal here. She's at LSU now studying graphic design." The bulletin board is doing what bulletin boards do in community spaces when someone puts something real on them. It is becoming the story of the place. Kezia adds things as they come. The Tamara Osei article, a photograph from the winter showcase, a drawing by a new student in the spring session, age 6, pencil on paper, a dog that looks like a dog in the specific way that a child's drawing of a dog looks like a dog when the child has been looking at the dog carefully. The bulletin board is not curated, it is accumulated. The way places accumulate what matters to them over time. Cece Turode passes the bulletin board on her way to the Colors Forward room twice a week. She looks at her drawing on it. She looks at it the way she looks at all her finished drawings. Briefly, with the neutral eye of someone assessing something they made and have now moved past. She always moves past. There is always another drawing. She keeps going. In April 2026, Colors Forward holds its 2nd annual spring showcase at the James and Jesse Jones Community Center. 37 students, 52 drawings, photographs, and mixed media pieces on 3 exhibition tables. Cece has 3 pieces in the show. The first is a portrait of Odette, her grandmother's face, the specific eyes, the expression of a woman who has kept a photograph on her refrigerator for 37 years and has never considered taking it down. Charcoal, clean and precise and true. The second is a portrait of Miss Ades, her 2nd grade teacher. The long silver earrings in the drawing catch the gallery light the way they catch the classroom light in the morning. The expression is the one Cece has been studying since September. The expression of a teacher who believes completely in the child she is teaching. The third is the hands, Odette's hands, from life, from 4 months of looking during meals and crossword puzzles and the specific activity of Odette on the phone. The hands of a woman who has been doing everything with her hands for 67 years, replanting fig trees, driving school buses, raising a granddaughter, opening refrigerators. The hands are right. Not technically right, actually right. Cece knows the difference. She had not shown the hands to Kezia until she was sure. It had taken 4 months, but she was sure. And the hands are right. Odette stands in front of the drawing of her own hands for a long time. She looks at them. Her hands, on paper, the way a 7-year-old who has been watching them for 4 months sees them. Worn at the knuckles, capable. The specific way they hold things. Firmly, without clutching, with the ease of someone who has been using them for 67 years and trusts them completely. She looks at the drawing. She looks at her hands. She looks at the drawing. She looks at Cece, standing beside her. "When did you start looking at my hands?" Odette says. Cece thinks. "A long time ago," she says. Odette looks at the drawing one more time. "You got them right," she says. Cece nods. She knows. She always does. In Orlando, Florida, on the same Saturday morning in April 2026, Shaquille O'Neal is in his kitchen. He has a cup of coffee. He is not thinking about New Orleans. He is thinking about what the day requires. But before he starts the day, he looks at the bulletin board by the window, the archive photograph, the bus driver and the team and the tall kid at the front. He looks at it. He thinks about a gymnasium on Jordan Avenue. He thinks about one knee on a floor. He thinks about the mouth, the specific few strokes at the right corner that made the face one moment from the real laugh. He thinks about a 7-year-old who stood in front of a refrigerator for 15 minutes until she could see what she needed to see, and then fixed the mouth. He picks up his coffee. He starts his day. The Florida morning comes through the window, bright and committed and warm, the way it always is. And in New Orleans, in the Bywater neighborhood, on Piety Street, in the second bedroom on the right, Cece Tourode is at her drawing board. There is a new face in her sketchbook that she has been looking at for 2 weeks. She is not ready yet. She will look more. She will get it right. She always does. That is not a promise anyone made her. It is something she has learned from looking carefully at faces for 3 years and understanding that the thing that makes a face actually right is always the same thing. More looking, and then the few strokes, and then it is true. And when it is true, you step back and nod and move on, because there is always another face, and another 15 minutes, and another drawing, and the room, when it sees what is actually true, goes quiet, and someone kneels down and looks for 4 minutes in complete silence, which is the only appropriate response to something actually true. That is the last word of this story. True. Everything else, the bus, the photograph, the refrigerator, the fig tree, the 15 minutes, the 4 minutes, the 7 words, everything else is the path that led to one drawing being actually true, and a room going quiet, and a man going down on one knee, and a 7-year-old looking at him with the direct, unimpressed gaze of someone who made a thing that is true and is waiting to see what the world does with that. The world went quiet. The world knelt down. The world looked. For 4 minutes. That is what truth deserves. 4 minutes, in silence, on one knee, in a gymnasium on Jordan Avenue in New Orleans, Louisiana, on a Saturday morning in October, in front of a drawing made by a 7-year-old who looked at a refrigerator for 3 years and fixed the mouth. He's from here. He always was. And she drew it. And the room knew. There is one small thing left. On the refrigerator in the kitchen on Piety Street. The photograph has been there for 25 years. Edmund put it there. Odette kept it. Cece drew it. In March 2026, Odette opens the refrigerator for something ordinary. Juice, maybe, or leftover rice from dinner. She opens it the way she has opened it 1,000 times, without thinking about it. But this time she pauses. She looks at the photograph. The big man with the real laugh and the trophy. She looks at it for a moment. She thinks about Edmund. She thinks about the bus. She thinks about a 16-year-old boy getting on that bus in 1987 and 1988, going to the games, not knowing the name of the man driving. She thinks about a 7-year-old standing in front of this refrigerator for 15 minutes until she could see what she needed to see. She thinks about 4 minutes of silence in a gymnasium. She closes the refrigerator. She goes back to what she was doing. The photograph stays where it has always been, at eye level when you open the door. The big man with the real laugh. One moment from the real laugh. The face that a 7-year-old got right. He's from here. Always was. Always will be. The refrigerator closes. The kitchen is warm. The fig tree is in the side yard, growing straight, as it always has, as it always will. That is the very last word. Straight. Everything crooked finds its way, if you give it enough time, and enough light, and someone who keeps looking at it, until they can see what they need to see, and then draws it. True. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. We have viewers from New Orleans and the Bywater, and every neighborhood that has ever had a face on a refrigerator that someone kept for 37 years. From Baton Rouge and Orlando and Newark and every city in between. From places where a child is drawing someone right now without anyone asking them to. From places where a photograph is on a refrigerator and nobody has yet thought to ask who put it there. We read every single comment, every one. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the photographs you kept, the faces you have been looking at without knowing why, the drawings you have not yet made of the people you love, please hit the like button right now. 1 second. It helps this reach someone tonight who needs to see it. Because right now, somewhere, a child is looking at a face on a refrigerator. They do not know yet that they are going to draw it. They do not know about the 15 minutes in front of the refrigerator that will come later. They do not know about the few strokes that will fix the mouth. They are just looking. But they are looking carefully. And that is how it starts. That is always how it starts. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe. Join a community that believes the faces we keep looking at become the drawings we eventually make. That the refrigerator photographs matter. That the people who drove the bus matter. That the circle closes when someone young enough to see it clearly looks carefully enough and fixes the mouth. Share this with one person today. The one who has a face on their refrigerator. The one whose photograph someone will draw one day. The one who drove the bus. One bus. One photograph. One refrigerator. 3 years of a child looking. 15 minutes. 4 minutes. 7 words. He's from here. True. Click on the video on your screen right now because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. See you soon. There is something about Odette Turod that belongs in this story before it fully closes. She is 67 years old. She drove a school bus for Orleans Parish Public Schools for 29 years. She raised a granddaughter alone. She replanted a fig tree from a cutting in 2006. She kept a photograph on a refrigerator for 25 years. She is not in the story as someone Shaq helped. She is not in the story as a recipient of anything. She is in the story as the person who kept the thread. Edmund put the photograph on the refrigerator. Edmund died. And Odette kept the photograph on the refrigerator. For 14 years after he was gone. Not because anyone told her to. Not because it made sense financially or practically or in any measurable way. Because Edmund had put it there and said, "That's ours. That's from here," and she had believed him. And she had kept it. And Cece had grown up looking at it. And at 7 she had drawn it. And the room had gone quiet. Odette does not know she is a central character in this story. She would not describe herself that way. She would say, "I kept a photograph. That is all." Anyone would. But not anyone does. Not everyone keeps the photograph. Not everyone says to the granddaughter, "Look at his face." Not everyone lets the thread stay uncut for 25 years because someone they loved put it there. Odette did. Because Edmund had said, "That's ours." And she had heard him. And she had kept it. This is the most ordinary, extraordinary act in the story. Not the drawing. Not the 4 minutes. Not the grant or the scholarship or the archive photograph of the bus. The keeping. The quiet, daily, unremarkable act of not taking the photograph down. Of opening the refrigerator 1,000 times in 14 years and not moving it. Of letting Chishi look at it. Of saying, "Look at his face." The keeping. That is what started everything else. You do not know what you are keeping when you keep something. Edmund did not know he was keeping a thread that would connect a bus he drove in 1987 to a gymnasium in 2025. Odette did not know she was keeping a thread that would become the subject of a drawing by a 7-year-old that would stop a man on one knee for 4 minutes. They were just keeping what mattered, the way people do when they love each other and trust each other and say, "That's ours." The keeping is the whole thing. Everything else follows from the keeping. So keep the things that matter. Keep them on the refrigerator. Say to the children, "Look at this face." You do not know what they will do with what they see, but they are looking. And one day they will draw it, and fix the mouth, and write across the bottom what they know to be true. And the room will go quiet, and someone will kneel down, and 4 minutes will pass, and it will be exactly right, and the circle will close. Just keep the photograph. That is all. That is everything.